So this video is going to cover three key events in the Troubles that are very famous. You've got Internment, Bloody Sunday, and Direct Rule. Okay, so first of all, Internment. Well, you saw that James Chichester Clark, the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland, resigned, and he was replaced by the man that they'd always wanted to be in charge, Brian Faulkner. Brian Faulkner is regarded as being very level-headed, a clear thinker, and he's popular with the Unionists as well too. So he replaced James Chichester Clark, and he replaced them with ideas that he thought would actually get Northern Ireland back to the way it was. He was under real big pressure to get results and to stop the violence, which was increasing steadily whenever he took over. So what he decided to do was something that was actually been tried before and had been successful before. That was the idea of internment. Internment is imprisoning key suspects without trial. So basically rounding them up and holding them without trial in the hope that by getting the key people that it would end the violence. So this had been tried before, way back in the 1950s, and had been quite successful. So what date did this take place then? So his idea for internment took place the 9th of August 1971, and the name of the operation was Demetrius. Demetrius is, I think it's a Greek god of fishing, and you can sort of see why. So they're basically trawling in a lot of what they believe are the key suspects. Okay, so why did internment fail so spectacularly? Because one thing is absolutely clear: it was a spectacular failure. It only added fuel to the fire and increased Republican activity spectacularly after this actually happened. The one reason that it was really it failed was that intelligence had really been very poor. The British Army knew this. Perhaps back in the 1950s they might have had a real good idea who all the Republicans would be in different communities, because that was well known, but after everything that happened since 1969 they didn't really have the same intelligence about who was in the Provisional IRA and who they were going to round up. So the people they were going to round up basically weren't going to be in it. Out of the 452 men that were arrested, not one of them was actually in the Provisional IRA or in the top ranks of the Provisional IRA. A lot of them were civil rights activists. Nationalists were obviously very angry at what happened here. It looked highly discriminatory. It looked as if the army was being used against them yet again, and they really did react badly against internment. They really felt as if the Unionists and the army had acted against them. It almost seemed to be that the army is now being used by the Unionists as another tool. So that went down very badly. And one key fact: although Loyalist violence was just as bad as Republican violence at this stage, there wasn't one Loyalist interned until 1973, I think. Okay, so not one Loyalist out of these 452 was actually interned. Okay, so it looks to be highly discriminatory. Alright, so reactions then. Well, you can tell that there are going to be a number of different reactions. Unionists were very happy to begin with. They actually saw Faulkner as being a man who's lived up to his word. He's come in, he's got action, and he's taken the action. They also saw it as working in the past and saw it as essential to end the IRA. However, things would change whenever this wasn't the result that actually happened. Nationalists, they saw obviously internment as completely one-sided. IRA membership absolutely rocketed after this, as people's families were more affected by this. The SDLP, they took a stance by starting a campaign to stop paying rates, that's local taxes, or rents, and civil rights marches began again, and you'll be able to know that one of those civil rights marches would actually end up being the Bloody Sunday March. There was huge increased violence. It didn't stop the violence whatsoever. It was a massive increase. 143 people were killed. That's a times 5 increase on previous figures. So this basically was like adding fuel to the fire. There was also terrible bombings at this time, including McGurk's Bar in Belfast, which was blamed on Loyalists, with 15 people dead, one of the worst atrocities in the Troubles. And there was a real big increase in Loyalist violence around this time as well too. The army reactions, well, the army took a much harder line. They brought in the parachute regiment. These are tough British soldiers who were used to fighting across the globe in trouble spots. They were brought in to try to manage things. and they began to take tougher actions, such as Magilligan, where a civil rights march was attacked with CS gas. Okay, so that's internment. Okay, what you need to know is that part of the consequences for internment were Bloody Sunday, because in January 1972 a march took place in Derry. It was a night march, and it was taking place, and it followed the attack on some of the civil rights protesters on the beach at Magilligan. So that should be January 30th, 1972. A night march through Derry sparked into a riot in one part of the process. The elite and tough parachute regiment of the British Army were actually sent into the Bogside area of Derry to deal with this, and these guys, again, they're used to the world's toughest places. Okay, so they're not necessarily at home in streets of what some would regard as the United Kingdom as well too. So they came under attack, and their response to this was to use strong action against it. Okay, so soon shots were fired, and 14 people were killed and 12 were injured. 13 people were killed in the day, one died later on. The TV images as were broadcast around the world and were absolutely startling to people in Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom and across Europe and the world. And it became known very quickly as Bloody Sunday. A lot of the people killed were, all of them were killed, were innocent civilians. They'd been taking part in the protest. So these pictures became really famous. You can see British soldiers trying to intervene in parts. You can see the priests trying to call a ceasefire as the bodies are removed, and you can see some of the victims be given the last rites here. And these are the 14 people that were actually killed at the time, or some of them anyway. You can see just a lot of them are very young. This is right afterwards, so the Derry Civil Rights Association covered of blood from the victims. Okay, so what were the results of Bloody Sunday? Well, I'm sure you can work out what they were. First of all, Unionists, they regretted the deaths. They did regret the deaths at the time, but they did see the march as being provocative, as going ahead despite it being banned. So they almost suggested that this was the result of that. Nationalists were obviously deeply angry. In Dublin, a huge crowd marched to the British Embassy and they burnt it down. They also burned some British shops down in Dublin as well too. This is pictures of this actually happening. So this is Ballsbridge in Dublin, where the British Embassy is. British government, they responded by creating a tribunal, the Widgery Tribunal, named after Lord Widgery, who chaired it. And what they hoped to happen was that this would get some of the details of exactly what happened, and a lot of nationalists felt that this would actually get justice. However, it wasn't the justice that they demanded, because there was almost a suggestion that some of them might have been involved with rioting, and it was nicknamed the Widgery Whitewash afterwards, because not one British soldier was held to account for what happened in Derry. Okay, so government itself, British government, was highly criticised around the world, and came under a huge amount of pressure. IRA membership in Northern Ireland and Ireland soared as more people took up, and a lot of finance arrived from America as well too for the Republican cause. Unionists really concerned about what was actually happening. They knew that this was happening. The IRA membership was soaring, that they were under pressure, and they formed a counter movement called Ulster Vanguard. It was a loyalist protest organisation led by William Craig, and it actually managed to garner up to 70,000 people in one meeting at the Ormeau Park, which really did show the anger and perhaps the fear of some Unionists at the time as well too. Okay, so again you've got internment, you've got Bloody Sunday, and the British government's going to have to react to this, because this is a major turning point, Bloody Sunday. So they do react. 1972, the Westminster government in London at last got involved in a much more direct way. The massive failure of internment, the disaster of Bloody Sunday, and what seems to be the ineffectiveness of Faulkner's Unionist government all added up to trying to demand reform. There was also the fear that Faulkner was now demanding, after Bloody Sunday, a knee-jerk reaction that the RUC were to be rearmed and the B specials were to be reintroduced. The British Prime Minister felt this was just going to add fuel to the fire. There was also increasing violence in the streets, so the British Army now stuck in the middle and deeply involved in this conflict. And the lack of any political process also showed underlying problems at the time. So the Prime Minister, Edward Heath, demanded action, and he says, you know what, we want control of law and order and justice in Northern Ireland. Faulkner, the Unionist Prime Minister, obviously said no, which Edward Heath expected. He called them to London, and he suggested that there was going to be more demands. He wanted this. He wanted internment to be slowly stopped, a referendum on whether Northern Ireland should stay in the United Kingdom or become part of United Ireland. He wanted security to be transferred to Westminster. He wanted a Secretary of State, a new position, to be appointed for Northern Ireland, and he wanted talks with the idea of getting all Northern Ireland parties to take part in a community government. Unionists would obviously not like very many of these whatsoever, which Edward Heath expects. So what happened then? Well, Faulkner's government were horrified at what they were being asked to do, and they all resigned in protest, hoping it would put pressure on Heath to not go through with these here. Heath was determined that he was, though, and he suspended Stormont. He just suspends the Northern Ireland Parliament. This was to be temporary for a year, and he imposes direct rule. What is direct rule then? Well, direct rule is basically being ruled directly from Westminster. Stormont is suspended, and the British Parliament takes control. Why is this important? Well, it means that Westminster can actually make the laws for Northern Ireland, which means that any civil rights laws can actually be passed much more easily in Westminster than they would have been in Stormont. So a team of British ministers is appointed, and they're led by a British Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who's appointed by the Prime Minister, and they would take over the responsibility of governing Northern Ireland. The first Secretary of State was a guy called William Whitelaw. Same here. Okay, what's the reactions to direct rule then? Well, Unionists were absolutely horrified. That is their parliament, their Stormont, their country. They believed it's a real big step towards a United Ireland, and they believed that Stormont, their protection against that, was actually been undermined. Up to 100,000 people, 100,000 loyalists, flocked to Stormont to protest at what had happened. A huge strike took place, organised by Ulster Vanguard, and it shut Northern Ireland down for 2 days. However, they could not force the British government to get them to return to Stormont. That ship had sailed. Nationalists welcomed the end of Stormont. It might seem strange that they welcomed direct rule, but Stormont for them was absolutely unfair system, and they wanted that changed. This is the first step. So the SDLP and Irish government welcomed the chance of a new start. The IRA were very happy they'd achieved one of their aims. That aim was to get rid of Stormont, but it wasn't prepared to stop until all of its aims were met. Basically that included a United Ireland, so it continued its bombing and shooting campaign. So what happened after this? So that's March 1972 direct rule. 1972 as a whole becomes the bloodiest year of the Troubles. Internment, British troops failed to end the violence. In fact, it intensified it. Direct rule seemed like a real chance for a new start. However, it just encouraged the IRA. They realised that they were closer than ever to their goals, so they kept on the bombing and the shooting. So they got one of their goals as well too, shutting down Stormont. Loyalists, because they were fearful of having lost Stormont, they increased their campaign of violence and they stepped up their campaign. And two horrific events stand out in 1972. The first one's Bloody Friday in July. 20 IRA bombs exploded all around Belfast in the space of 1 hour, completely throwing the city into chaos. 9 people were killed, many of them civilian, and there was many injuries as part of that there. It horrified Belfast. There were scenes of bits of bodies being put into bags by firemen. This caused horrifying reaction, even amongst Republican supporters. And then you had the Claudy bombing up in County Londonderry, a small village. 9 civilians were killed, Protestants and Catholics, in what must have been a misjudged bomb. in that year, 496 people died, by far the worst year of the Troubles. Horrific casualties. Just the final part here then. So, in an effort to try to make things better after Bloody Sunday, or after Bloody Friday, I should say, the British government reacted by having Operation Motorman. It's one of its biggest peacetime operations, and what it aimed to do was to smash paramilitary no-go areas which had emerged around Belfast and Derry. They had informed the people in these communities this is what's going to happen, in an effort to avoid any conflict, and it was in fact very successful. The army smashed the no-go areas and tried to regain law and order again as well too. Its success allowed the British government to work towards its main aim. That aim was an agreed government for all in Northern Ireland, which would be the Sunningdale Agreement, which we will look at next. Okay, hopefully this was useful.